Hello everyone, so we are the group B composed of Hechanova, Sandig, Surmion, and Villegas, and we are going to present the reading to The Ring of Gyges by Plato.
The Ring of Gyges. The Ring of Gyges is a mythical item portrayed in the story of shepherd Gyges. It was presented in Plato's second book from the series called The Republic, which in fact is considered as one of his finest contributions in all of political philosophy. The story illustrates the idea of morality and what is good. It also represents the idea that some things are inherently good while others are good because of their outcomes. Some things are good just for the sake of being good, regardless of the consequences. On the other hand, some things are good as a result of their effects and outcomes. The main speaker of this reading, Glucon, describes egoism, a widely believed and profoundly held ethical viewpoint taught by Antiphon, a sophistic contemporary of Socrates. Egoistic views are based on the assumption that everyone acts solely for their own benefit. It explains that some people offer to help others on the basis of what they might gain in return from those who are helped.
Plato is an Athenian philosopher, and based on the records, his birth and death year is uncertain, so he died at the age of either 80 or 81. His ethical thinking is structured by a broad eudaemonist assumption, and his view on new wisdom is greatly influenced by his mentor and friend Socrates. Socrates and Plato rejects the idea that wisdom is passed down to other mortals. They believe that it can only be attained when the individual goes through the process of discovering it by collaborative discussions. It is important that an individual should be able to reason and reflect to formulate his own moral and practical opinion. Because of this, Plato established a Platonic dialogue in his works where he speaks as a whole and not as a single speaker. His works have a principal speaker who establishes the topic of discussion and presides over it. It allows the readers to question and demand themselves to think and decide, and not simply taking a claim to establish a philosophical truth. So basically, Plato in his works is inviting others to do their own intellectual work with him. Platonist philosophers also regarded Plato's writing as the repository of the ultimate and permanent highest truths about the universe. This is why Plutarch, a Platonist, once wrote, Plato is philosophy, and philosophy is Plato.
The story of the Ring of Gyges started when, one day, a shepherd under the service of the king of Lydia, named Gyges, was out with his flock, and suddenly a great thunderstorm and earthquake started. These caused the ground to break open and created a chasm or crevice near where he was tending his sheep. Filled with amazement, Gyges went down, and there he found something, a hollow bronze horse with a window-like opening. As he opens and peeped through the doors, he saw a corpse, a human skeletal form that wears a gold ring on his finger. Gyges then took the ring and ascended out of the crevice. He wore this ring later during their monthly meeting where they report to the king about the state of the flocks.
As he was with the others, he came about to turn the ring, having its outside portion facing him, instantly making him invisible to the others, as if he did not exist. He started examining the ring and turned it to its original position, and he reappeared. He tried it several times to test whether the ring really possessed power, and confirm his suspicion. He then came to realize that when he turns the ring inward, he becomes invisible, and when turned outward, he returns to being visible. He then used the ring to his advantage to be chosen as one of the messengers to report to the king, seduced the king's wife, and together they conspired against the king and killed him, ending up for him ruling the kingdom.
Moral of the story: a man will eventually be an unjust man as long as he believes that he cannot be punished. People will do everything to satisfy their needs when they were given power and anonymity. To acquire great power allows man to fulfill his own desire, whether it leads to being unjust. A man is ready to pursue his own interest, regardless of causing explicit danger to others.
You've probably heard the saying that character is who you are when no one's looking. While most of us would like to think we do the right thing in any circumstances,
there's a real question about whether we just try to appear to be moral to avoid negative social sanctions.
Megan.
Put it back.
Sorry.
All of it.
Okay.
In Plato's Republic, he tackles this question of moral motivation head on. In Book 2 of the Republic, Socrates, the main character, poses a thought experiment. Imagine a shepherd tending a flock alone at night. He finds a golden ring with the power to make himself invisible. Glaucon, Socrates' friend, argues that with such a power, none of us would have any motivation to be moral. I can still see the money.
Ouch!
Now you might think this is just another far-fetched philosophical thought experiment, completely devoid from day-to-day issues. But just think about what happens when people put on the golden ring of anonymity in internet comment sections, or on apps that disguise their identity. People will say some pretty hateful, racist, and sexist things when given the cloak of anonymity. There are cases where people have been bullied to death, harassed, or assaulted in such situations.
Really makes you wonder why we do what we do.
Is it because we care about genuinely being moral, about helping other people?
Or is it because we just can't get away with what we'd really like to do?
It's not even real money.
What is justice? According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, justice is the maintenance or administration of what is just, especially by the impartial adjustment of conflicting claims or the assignment of merited rewards or punishments. It is also the establishment or determination of rights according to the rules of law. For example, according to the Constitution, killing someone is considered as unlawful. When it is proven by the court, it is considered just to imprison the murderer. On the other hand, injustice is the absence of justice. It is the violation of right or of the rights of another. For example, let's go back to the situation I presented earlier. Killing is considered as unlawful, and when proven guilty, imprisonment serves justice. However, when the court failed to recognize that the act was done as a justified self-defense, sending someone to prison and calling him or her as a murderer is an act of injustice.
Based on the reading, justice and injustice is, first, act of justice is involuntary. Man acts according to their interest which they deem good unless directed by the law. Man acts in just a manner as justice is considered to be the lesser evil, or because they do not have their capability to do injustice. For man, justice is the mediator of worst and good, but not as the good. Next, man views justice as a necessity, because when a man has the opportunity and means to be unjust, he will continue to be one. Man be just in accordance with the established law, not because he wanted to. Lastly, injustice is profitable to man. As a man believes that being in justice is more profitable than justice to themselves, for being in justice, their personal desire is fulfilled without being controlled. Just like in the reading, when a just and unjust man is let to move on their own bringing with them the injustice and justice in themselves, both men would take the same path of injustice. But the just man will obey the law of justice, for he sees that it could bring him goodness, and an unjust man will continue to be unjust when he can do it safely.
is just. It is an act that is in accordance with the law, something that sounds morally and in an ethical way. Free of any biases, there is fairness in man. It is the goodness and rightness of conduct. This epithet is applied to that which agrees with a given law, which is the test of right and wrong. It is that which accords with the perfect rights of others. By just is also understood full and perfect, as a just weight. For example, a man that whatever he has done has been done for good reasons and is fair to all sides, and a man is consistent with what is morally right.
What is unjust? Someone that is unjust is not fair. An act that is not done according to accepted legal or moral standards. For example, man would opt to do injustice when he can safely do it, given that he would not be caught, as he has the power to do so. Having the means to evade the consequences of doing bad tolerates a man's desire to do more injustice. The same case with the shepherd in story. He had a ring which possesses magical power that can turn a man invisible. He used it to his advantage to fulfill his desire of coveting king's wife, conspire against and kill the king, and take over the ruling of the kingdom. Injustice is well served to its extreme with the perpetrator getting punished.
The ideas of interest. According to Glaucon's brief, why do most persons act justly? And is his explanation psychologically correct? According to Glaucon, people act justly mostly out of fear of punishment. And people are terrified that when they do unjust things will also be done to them, and that is undesirable. People don't want to suffer due to the consequences of doing unjust things, so they compromise to not harm each other, and that is how laws and justice became important in society. People act just because they are forced to do so, not out of willingness. And justice is right by nature only when justice is used to settle between doing unjust things and not being punished or to suffer from injustice without the means to fight back.
Would there be any reason for that person to act morally if his injustice would not be discovered, or this action were discovered but no punishing consequences? No man is willingly just, and if people will be given a chance to have the power to be unjust without any consequences, they would do it. Because of the people's self-interest, they just obey the law because they fear the consequences. This shows that people are self-centered and egoistic. Driven by desire, man can just do unjust things just to fulfill these desires, which is advantageous for themselves. Having the power to do unjust things without being caught, man would continue doing unjust until he reached the extremes. Proving to be just, even though it tells otherwise, is the highest form of injustice.
Is it true that sometimes self-interest is served by not acting in our self-interest? Well, self-interest may not always be served by acting based in our self-interest, but maybe because directed by external factors such as the law. It would come to a point where it would be disadvantageous to our desire and ego, as we're doing things against our will just to abide the established ruling.
Quite often, people are pleased when they can help others. Is it sufficient to prove that the motive for helping others is ultimately one of the pleasure or of self-interest? Helping others shows morality as a person. When a person is pleased, when they can help other people, it can be out of the goodness with them themselves, which can be driven by pleasure and self-interest. If one is pleasured by helping another, it can be out of being satisfied with the act. However, when one helps the other out of self-interest, ulterior motives may arise. No one knows what the helper thinks except for himself after helping others. He might want an appraisal behind those acts that would personally benefit him.
How does the practice of justice arise? Glaucon believes that human beings practice justice to avoid the harm that would come to them if they disobey the laws set by society. Thus, it is in our self-interest to obey the law, because we fear the consequences if we were to get caught disobeying the law. Practice of ethics makes sense in the context if living in a society, their collective beliefs and values. It comes from individuals who are willing to make difficult choices and think about big questions. What is good and bad, and what is right and wrong?
Be like Gyges, absent all possibilities of social retribution in a cloak of invisibility, would you still act morally? I'll let you answer that. The intuition that we are all moral hypocrites who only care about seeming righteous as opposed to actually being it is corroborated by psychological experiments. Daniel Batson at the University of Kansas paired his participants in an experiment he carried out in groups of 2. He then had each one of them privately assign a pair of tasks, one positive and one negative, to their partner and themselves. The subjects were allowed to assign the task directly at their will or carry out a coin flip in the spirit of fairness, which, by the way, they could always ignore if they wanted. He then had them rate their decision of assigning the tasks in terms of how ethical they considered it to have been from 1 to 9, 1 being completely immoral and 9 being completely moral. It turns out that not only did most participants assign themselves the positive tasks, but their self-ratings were higher when the coin was flipped and they ignored the results and assigned themselves whatever they wanted anyway. In other words, the more present the apparent display of fairness, in this case the coin flip, the more righteous their self-estimation was. The results suggest that Glaucon might have actually been onto something when he mentioned that our concern is primarily with seeming moral rather than being so.
Conclusions and insights. People are self-interested and egoistic. They are primarily focused and preoccupied with oneself and the gratification of their own desires. Doing injustice is right by nature, but the law can force you to act against it. This is where the quote, "Your freedom ends where the right of others begins," makes sense. You may consider your actions just, but it is not considered as socially just. Everyone would choose to be unjust and satisfy their own interest if they had the power to do whatever they wanted with no consequences. Someone is only just due to extrinsic reasons. No one wanted to suffer from negative consequences, so they try to do what is socially acceptable. Justice does not serve us personally, and we would always do the wrong thing if given a chance. Desire drives a man to do unjust things and will continue to do so when the situation favors. Justice is just a mediator between doing injustice without suffering from the consequences and suffering from injustice without having reprisal, because having the power of anonymity and invisibility gives someone the confidence to commit injustice and gratify their desires. Being just is only done out of necessity.